in a relationship you trust the other, and trust and truth have the same origin. So I believe that whatever it is that we know and experience ultimately comes out of relationships. And of course, in the Christian religion, but also in other religions, the ground of being, whatever word one uses to describe that, is love. And love is nothing except a relation. But I think I'm going to be the one that kicks off, so to speak. First of all, it's a great honour and pleasure to be able to have this conversation, Rowan. We've talked in public before and in private, but it's always an honour. And I think, to a large extent, we have fairly similar visions of the cosmos, I believe, although we do maybe have points of difference. But what I wanted to say, because I think one of the issues we're asking about is the nature of reality, and so we've got less than half an hour to get there, but one of the important points about it is that it has always seemed to me since childhood, and certainly since my teens, that the world was rather different from the one that is often explained in the modern idiom, which is of a world which is largely sort of passively there and not responsive to us, that opposites get as far away from one another as possible, whereas I believe they tend to coincide, that context makes a huge difference, and that things are connected one with another, and the process of the intellect is to divide them up. That dividing up is very important, of course, but it's only a preparatory phase to reconnecting something that is now more complex. And that, I think, is the bit that we've lost sight of. So in the realms of epistemology, as I've laid out in the second part of my latest book, The Matter with Things, I think there are different ways in which we can get at reality. And they do involve science, and they do involve reason. I'm passionate about both of them. But neither of those will take us all the way by any means. We also need the capacity for intuition and imagination, which teaches other things that may be very true, but difficult to articulate in the terms or reach in terms of science and reason. I mean, a good example is music, something that has made my life as happy as it is and as fulfilled as it is, and yet it is not either encompassable by reason or by science. Neither can really explain why Mozart's G minor quintet is such a profound experience. And starting from there, just going on to the whole business of consciousness, what is consciousness? The idea that everything can be reduced to mere matter, that is, if you believe matter is mere at all, which I don't, then, you're missing an enormous amount in life. And I think the sense of something beyond that is connected to us, in which we all cohere, which has an existence that suggests something rich and complex, and that we have intuitions of and are drawn towards, but can never fully grasp. I think that is where I would situate my beliefs about the place of the sacred, at any rate, in the idea of the cosmos as a whole. Do you have any reflections on that, Rowan?
First of all, to say that I'm very impressed you've managed to reduce those two enormous volumes to the last 5 minutes. But that's not an excuse for not reading the two large volumes, I hasten to add. A couple of things which have always struck me about your work and which struck me in the way you'd presented it now, which I think are key in pushing back at some of the myths that hold us captive in our contemporary culture. First is what you said about mere matter. We think there's a nice simple opposition between materialism and something else which is softer and woozier. And that means we buy into a particular mythology about what matter is. We think matter is little lumps of hard stuff. Yeah. It exists in small associations and big associations, but basically it's little lumps of hard stuff. What if we reset our imagination where matter is concerned and think about matter in terms of communication, frequency, energy in different concentrations, which is, what any self-respecting physicist will tell you. What if you start there? It all looks a bit different then. And that leads on to the second thing. We've bought into a picture of knowledge, which is essentially about something in here, looking out there, labeling, categorizing, and so forth, sitting still while we take a rather slow exposure photograph of it. As if we're saying to the world around, look, don't do anything, just hang on while I fix you. Again, what if the process of knowledge is a matter of attuning to energy, communication, that is coming to us? What if the form we intuit is active, not just passive?
Exactly.
And then I suppose that really leads on to the third crucial element in what you're sharing here, which is that our characteristic position in the universe as human subjects is neither that of a sort of mindless instrument of impersonal forces, nor the position of a godlike other who has somehow parachuted into this world of little lumps of stuff. Our position is that of someone trying to catch the continuities, trying to go with the flow, quite literally, to make something of the patterns of energy that are communicating to us. And part of that, and this is a key to the sort of granular work that you set out, especially in volume 1 of the 2 books, part of this is the recognition that our brains are so constituted that it's not a matter of hard and soft bits of knowledge, but granular and integrative kinds of knowledge. If you're capable of recognizing eyes, noses, and mouths, but have no idea what a face is, then there's something a bit wrong in how you're relating. And I'd love to hear you say more about the actual experimental evidence from the neurological world that helps fix that. Those are the things which I really taken as the take-home messages from the books.
Yes, thank you. And I probably won't, because of time, go into the detail of the neurology, but thank you for that recognition that there is something there that I think is important about two entirely different ways of attending to the world. The prime difference between the hemispheres is the kind of attention they pay. And I'm not going to take up a lot of time on the hemisphere hypothesis, but what is important is that the left hemisphere sees these fixed things that the camera was photographing, as you referred to. So granular, atomistic, isolated, decontextualized, abstracted, fixed. Whereas the right hemisphere sees that in reality, everything is connected ultimately to everything else, that it's never completely fixed or known or certain, is knowable, and we can have greater degrees of certainty and truth about it, but it is not a final thing that exists out there. It comes from a relationship. And this is the really key thing. I argue in The Matter of Things that relationships are what the universe is made of, and that the relata, the things that are related, emerge secondarily from the web of relationships. I know that sounds paradoxical, but we haven't time to go into that perhaps too much. But the point there is that things only become what they are, those things we think we see, because of where they're situated in relation to everything else and the full context in which they inhere. And so that perception changes the way we think of knowledge. It's not that there's stuff out there that we can more faithfully or otherwise record simply passively. It's something about, if we really want to know it, we have to enter into a relationship with it. And that means that something of us goes into the experience of whatever it is we experience. No surprises in that. But it does not, I emphatically insist, does not lead anywhere near a sort of postmodern belief that we all just make it up. I resist that with every fiber of my being. I think instead we have a task, a duty, which is to follow truthfully our intuitions where they seem to be testable and true in the experience of life. And that there is a truth, but it is something that we approach in a spirit of approximation and trust. In a relationship, you trust the other, and trust and truth have the same origin. So I believe that whatever it is that we know and experience ultimately comes out of relationships. And of course, in the Christian religion, but also in other religions, the ground of being, whatever word one uses to describe that, is love. And love is nothing except a relation.
And the way you put it there reminds me of the way in which somebody like St. Augustine talks about knowledge itself. We don't know unless we love. And he doesn't by that mean we know what we feel warmly about. He means simply that we have an investment in our knowing. This is about me and how I'm going to be and how I'm going to receive and give. And when I'm in that kind of relationship, truth actually impresses upon me. I am in an adequate or appropriate relationship with what is coming to me. And that's truthfulness. But precisely because it's relational, it's also time-based. You can't freeze it. You can't say, well, that's it, and that's all that there ever will be to say. And the other dimension, which I think comes through very powerfully in your book, In the Matter with Things, is the role of time.
Yes.
And the way in which certain kinds of dysfunction of the brain manifest themselves as an inability to cope with time sequencing.
Yes.
And an inability to see oneself as a time-bound subject. Now, that, to me, as both as coming at it from a philosophical point of view and coming at it from a religious and theological point of view, makes absolute sense. We are, of our very nature, time-taking beings. Growth is part of what we are. And if your ideal of knowledge is a set of, again, frozen photographs, which will be the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, to use a theological phrase, then there's something, again, you've really missed there. But I want to come back, if I may, into the word intuition
Yes.
you used. I would hazard a guess that for a lot of people in an audience like this, the word intuition has a very slightly loose feeling.
Yes.
You know, oh, I've got an intuition that that's the case.
Yes.
But I think you're saying something rather stronger than that, aren't you? That there's a cohesive connection-making capacity that is just inbuilt in our mental process, which, name it intuition or whatever, but it's stronger than just a vague feeling, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, intuitions can deceive us, there's no question about that. And that's a point of view that's put about and makes a lot of money for bands of psychologists who go into organizations all around the world and say, never trust your intuitions. However, this is very foolish advice. And what we need to do is not always trust, but certainly not never to trust, but to pay adequate respect to our intuitions. The same is true of reason and science. They can lead us to mistaken places. Even reason can, believe me. And so I'm a great believer in science and reason, but they are not able to tell the full story. And intuition can tell us enormous amounts. And when you have to collapse an intuition, which is often implicit, into an expression in language, it becomes single, explicit, and defined by language. Whereas when it remains at an intuitive level, as many as 12 or 15 different strands of knowledge and experience are being brought together and weighed together. As a result of that, a jurist, in other words, an academic specialist in the law in Germany, the head of one of the Max Planck Institutes, says that in every organization, people should be encouraged as much as possible to understand their intuitions, use their intuitions, and of course, examine their intuitions.
I was thinking there of something I've quoted more than once in recent months, and that is Phil Whitaker writing in the New Statesman a couple of years ago about online diagnostic tools in medicine and the strength and the weakness.
Yeah.
Because the weakness is that there will always be, in a physician's diagnosis, elements that do not yield readily to precise formulation, but without which you will get things disastrously wrong in your perception of what's there, because the online tools can only give you information in response to certain questions. And those will be the questions you're aware of. But if you're a good physician, you will know in the diagnostic process that there are things you're picking up which you don't know you're picking up, and that those will be feeding in somewhere to your overall response. And I think it's that holistic sense and the sense of what you're not actually bringing to the forefront of your mind that is important. It's not flabby, it's not loose and impressionistic, but it's very hard to nail down.
Yes, I mean, online tools can be trained, obviously, on masses and masses of expert knowledge, and then we think that they're doing what an expert does. And sometimes they can be very helpful because they can work faster than the human mind often works. But they can be disastrously wrong because everything, this is a simple point, but a very important one, everything depends on its context. And the context of symptoms is a whole person, a life, and all sorts of circumstances that are going on before and after the consultation and around it. So you're always dealing again in a relationship. And what an AI tool doesn't give us the option of is a relationship. It may simulate dangerously one and lead to a great deal of untruth and suffering, but it is that relationship that matters. And you know, you were quoting Augustine, and of course there are others like Pascal who learned a lot from Augustine, who said that first you must love something if you want to understand it. But of course people would say, but you can only love it when you understand it. And there's some truth in what I'm getting at there is a circular process or a recurrent reverberative process. So you commit yourself partially to something and you see what happens. And what happens guides your response and its response. And you won't find this by sitting calmly reading a book. You have to be immersed in the living process. It's like trying to learn to swim by sitting on the bank of a river with a book and saying, yes, I think I know now how to swim. You actually have to get into the water.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.